All right, again, welcome everyone. Today, what we're going to be going over is the live classroom feature of coding rooms, which is an extremely exciting feature. I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. It's one of the things that does give programming teachers superpowers, and I think you'll be very excited about it. So I did throw the coding rooms link in the chat area there. It's just codingrooms.com though, very easy to get to. If you were to log into that, you would then access your teacher dashboard, where as a teacher, you can create courses and do all the teacher administration things that you'd like to do. The thing that we're going to focus on is at the top here, you kind of have some of the different sections of coding rooms. Your courses, in which you can publish assignments to your classes for the students you have registered for your class. The live classroom, which is what we're going to focus on. And then the workspaces, where you can just actually just create a coding workspace for an independent project or to test something out, anything you'd like to do there. Again, I'm going to go over to the live classroom. And if I was to give you an overview of the live classroom, this is a space for you to conduct a class with your students, almost like they were in person, probably, but where they can see your code and you can see their code in the most efficient way possible. To start a live classroom, you just click on the new live classroom link. Very similar to creating something like a Zoom meeting, a Google Meet, something like that. You can identify like a topic. Because we're in coding rooms here and we're doing this for a programming class, you're going to identify the language that you want the students' workspaces to be in. As you can see, coding rooms, if this is your first experience, has an extensive list of different languages you can pick from. For security reasons, coding rooms is set up so that you can attach this live classroom to one of your courses, so only students in that course can access the live classroom. So if you're worried about, someone Zoom bombing you type of thing in this live classroom, once you see it in a little bit, they won't be able to do that if you set it up so it's only for your enrolled students. For this purposes, obviously none of you are enrolled in my course. I'm just going to select none, and when you select none, it's more open where you can invite anyone. Actually, when you select none, one of the great things is, let's say you're running a workshop or something like that, anybody with the link, even without a Coding Rooms account, can actually log into this system. You can set a start date and a start time, which will be visible to the individual that, maybe if you did it part of a course, the students would actually see that in the live classrooms area, as well as if you add this to somebody's calendar, something like that, you could see that information. For tonight, I'm not going to be too worried about that. You can, again, set a duration. That's all for more calendar type features of something, because this does have a video conferencing aspect to it. I'm going to show off a couple of these other things, but there are some settings to set up here at first. For instance, you can turn off the video conferencing or leave it on. You can make it a smaller panel at first, but I'll show you how we can adjust. I'll show the differences between that in a little bit. And you can also do the Streamline code presentation. And what that does, and I'll talk a little bit more about that once we actually launch the live classroom. But what this does is this limits the students from being able to edit the actual instructor presentation area. If you turn it off, the students can actually edit that space. And again, once you actually see the live classroom, this will make more sense, and we'll come back to this area to talk more about these things. Because this Coding Rooms live classroom has some other messaging capabilities, like you would expect in some kind of video meeting, you can actually turn off those messaging features also if you don't want students to be able to communicate with each other. Once you actually create the live classroom, you're presented with this screen, and essentially you've created it in the Coding Rooms platform. So what you can do is share this with your students in order for them to access it. For instance, there's this learner link right here in which you can copy that link. You can send it to your students, either put it, maybe if you use Google Classroom or another learning management system, you can post it there for your students to be able to actually access the live classroom. For example, I'm going to put it in the chat right now. Because I haven't started the live classroom, if you go and you click on that, you're not going to be able to join just yet until I open it up. You can see here that if you did set up specific times, you can add it to your Google Calendar, invite students, so maybe that's a way you want to manage it. What I do, and so what my suggestion would be is just to get this link and be able to actually share it on whatever document, ways that you assign assignments, however you're sharing with your students currently. If you click on the share button at the top also, you can copy to your clipboard a little bit more information to go along with the link. Really is dependent on kind of what you want to share or how much information you want to show. But that will actually grab a little bit more information about that. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is often if we're setting up a space for our students to work on a lesson with us, some kind of coding lesson, sometimes there are files that we need to configure ahead of time. Maybe some things that we want to add for them to work on, a template we want to set up. There may be some things, some setup ahead of time. Coding Rooms does allow for that with this template files. If you click on Edit Template, you can actually edit the coding workspace before the students access it so that you can include some information. The important thing, the reason why I want to show it right now is you do have to click and edit this template before you actually start the classroom. Once you start the classroom, you can't go back and edit the template because the student workspaces have already been populated. So you must edit the template ahead of time. For instance, I can say something like, in the area below, print your name. Maybe that's the task I'm going to have all of you do in a minute. Make sure you click Save Changes. And now everybody will get this as a starting point. We can, of course, create other files. For you to be able to run, or the students would have. And you can create as many files as you need for your particular lesson. As well as you can actually upload any files that maybe you have on your computer that you want to include in the workspace for the students as they work through this lesson. I'm going to click Save Changes now. And let's start up this lesson. I'm going to copy this one more time. And I'm going to start the live classroom. I threw the link in the chat just in case a couple people got bounced off, came back in type of thing. And as I can see, a number of you had already clicked on the link and have joined. I can see all my students that have joined my live classroom. If you take a peek at my screen, for instance, I can see all of you that have populated over here on the left. Now, as you join, again, I can see your screen there, but let me talk about some of the interface here for you to be able to observe. Over here, on the left-hand side, you see the video conferencing area. Most likely, it's not working the way that you'd expect, right? We're not seeing video because we're on Zoom already. But obviously over here, your students could join and you could see their videos or they could see your video. So we could use Coding Rooms just as our video conferencing platform also, as we're part of a meeting. So if you're doing some online class session, this is an excellent tool where you can do it all in one spot. Mainly what I want to point out are these tabs along the top. And these tabs along the top, you'll see presentation, presentation / my workspace, in the my workspace area. The presentation is my workspace as the teacher. Okay. Notice that you can see, as I type in real time, you can see the changes I make. So as a student, you can follow along incredibly easily about what I'm doing as the teacher. My suggestion always is for my students that they're going to want to click on the presentation / my workspace tab at the top. Because when students click on that, they're going to see the presentation area and their coding area at the same time. So they can follow along and you can type out some information. Now, what I can do also, though, is maybe let's say this is a warm-up activity for your class. This was a fairly easy maybe task, some of you that know Python, and you come in here and you start and you have it print your name. Well, I can go over, and while my students are logging in and complete this little warm-up activity, I can check on their progress. And this is the amazing power of Coding Rooms. Is on the teacher side, so you'll notice you don't have the Student Workspaces tab. I have the Students Workspaces tab. Okay, and I can see all my students' workspaces. I can see what you guys were doing. For instance, Sean here is a student. Thanks, Sean. There are options for how many workspaces you can see at any given time. So if you have more students, you can kind of see those available areas. Also, what I prefer to do is I actually prefer, because typically, you know, for this kind of assignment, it's perfectly fine. I can see everything that probably you guys would type in your space, but I typically prefer to look at the student areas in a full width view, so I can actually see it as a full area, and I can kind of scroll down and see my students. So again, typically me as a teacher, I'll just have this presentation area up and I'll type in here and all the students will see that on their screens. I always recommend my students, and they're now in the habit of it, to always have the presentation / my workspace tab open so that they can actually see what I'm typing and doing, and they can actually type it into their area. Now, notice that I also have a presentation my workspace tab. This workspace is my private teacher workspace. Let's say you're in the middle of a lesson, you go, oh, is this really going to work this way? You can go over to your own workspace that's private to you as the teacher. You can test out a few things, run it without the student seeing it, and then come back over to the presentation area where you want to show something. Possibly you've preloaded this area with some notes for yourself also is another great idea. Because you can open the, you can open the live classroom before class starts also. Now, some of you probably intuitively kind of figured out some of the developing environment that we have embedded here for Coding Rooms, but let me just talk through a couple details, as most of you here today are new to Coding Rooms. So if you're not familiar with Python code, just know that you can type this word print, put some parentheses, and inside of some quotes, you can put some words, and it's going to print out down in this console area down below here. Very easily, you can click the run button, and it will do that. If you have other files, Coding Rooms has it set up, and this is really nice as a very simple environment for your students, because a lot of other ones tend to have more complicated setups when you have multiple files. But Coding Rooms has this really nice drop down next to the run button where you can select a different file to actually run. So if I want to run this something else.py that I provided you guys with, there's nothing there, so there's nothing to really execute.
So that's how I would do a runner and a client class?
Absolutely. So if you're an AP Computer Science A teacher or a Java teacher, and you'd like to provide your students with a class file where they're going to design this class, and a Java file where they're going to design this class, and then you have some kind of runner file to actually test that class, instantiate the objects, you can do that exactly. Typically what I do is I'll leave the default file as the one where they're going to test it out, because then the run button is defaulted to that. And then I have them build their class, whatever it may be, in another .java file. Now, if you do have any interaction, for instance, user input that you need to have the students work with, down below here, you do have to start up an instance of a Linux terminal. So you can start that up. If you have any graphics or any other interaction, you have to open this up. Hopefully soon, you won't have to actually do this process, because at the end, so make sure you stick around till the end, I'm going to show off version 2 IDE for Coding Rooms, which is really, really fabulous. So you'll want to check that out. And in that version 2, you actually won't have to do this process. But for now, that's how it will be. And so now, for instance, I can add any interaction and any graphics. And this is something that really sold me on Coding Rooms, is I can actually open up a desktop view of the Linux machine that's running this code, so I can see those graphics. So if my students, for instance, were doing tkinter for a GUI in Python, or you're doing some graphics with Java, Swing, or something like that, your students can actually open up a desktop and actually see their application open up. So that can be all controlled once you open up the interactive terminal. Same thing with the input function here in Python, or if you're using scanner in Java, you need to have this instance interactive terminal open. Another thing for you, the teacher, when you go over to the student workspaces, or if you're on the presentation, is you can see a file history. Over right next to the run button, you'll see this playback button. And if you click on that playback button, we can run through each keystroke that the student made. This is incredibly helpful when you want to see the process that the student went through, or if you want to check to see if they've actually did any of the work. For instance, you may notice that the presentation area, you can copy and paste from there. And most of the time in a live classroom, that's completely okay, because you're going through a lesson, so they may copy and paste elements of it. It's more for their learning. But you can check on these things by looking at that history area. Even for the full assignments in Coding Rooms, although we're not going to go over that extensively in this webinar, but if you didn't check out our previous webinar, it is on YouTube, where you can check out assignments and auto grading. The assignments feature also has this playback feature where you can check out the history of that file and see all the keystrokes. Students can also add their own files, and I typically do this. Someone mentioned their AP Computer Science A class or their Java course. I do this a lot, especially if a student's creating their own class and they need a new Java file. I have them go and kind of create their own. So you can just click this plus button. I'm actually on I can do it on a student's workspace, but let me go over to the presentation, click this plus button, and you can actually create a new file and add it to the workspace there. Now, if I add it to the presentation, each student will have to add it to their own presentation. This is not like the template where it's going to populate on each student's workspace. So note that any files you'd like to be automatically populated on the student workspaces needs to be created in that template before you actually start the live classroom. Students can also download files from this. So whatever they've worked on, if they need to download them for somewhere else, you can click on the download arrow in that top area, kind of where the tabs of the different files are all the way to the right, and they can download the entire project. Before I go and I'm going to talk about the conferencing tool, and I'm going to talk about now some more tips and tricks in a minute that I focus on in my classroom. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I use the conferencing tool for. But before I move on to that, just while people are maybe playing around with the IDE while we go over things, is there any questions about that? All right. So we have this conferencing area. And if you're doing an online course or your students are virtual still, of course, this is incredibly useful. Is you can replace Zoom, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams conferencing, whatever you end up using, you can replace that. You can just log into coding rooms, and their code in your full lesson is there, as well as your video conferencing, where students can mute, unmute, show their camera, not show their camera, and all of those things. So you can see that those controls are here, and it's pretty intuitive with so many people using video conferencing now. I'm sure you can kind of figure out, muting, unmuting, turning on your camera, etc. What I also would like to show you, though, is that it does have screen share capabilities. And this is actually mainly what I use it for personally in my classroom. Is what I will do is sometimes I have lesson slides that kind of go along with the lesson. And I like to do a screen share of that. And then students can see it right next to their workspace. So now most of the time in my class specifically, what will happen is I will have students see the lesson slides, the presentation workspace, and then their workspace. So they have 3 panels right inside of one Chrome window, and they can see everything they need to, all the resources they need for the lesson right inside of one window. And students really enjoy that, because in most classes, and even in my class previous to using coding rooms, they would have to switch between tabs to access these different things. Do some kind of split screen with my screen share and their coding area. Everything in coding rooms is built into one screen, and it allows students to be so much more efficient during the lesson, and they're not worried about managing their tabs, their browser tabs, and they're focused on actually learning the content. Another great thing I like to do is if you have some kind of whiteboarding app, for instance, I use Microsoft Whiteboard. You can download it for free on Windows 10, for instance. I often like to share that for if you're doing some whiteboarding, and your students can actually see that, and you can draw what you need to with that, and how whatever when you're drawing out maybe memory locations or trying to show off something. You can share a whiteboard, you can do that, and they can see it right inside of coding rooms. It's really cool. So there's all kinds of different things that you can use that for. If you'd like, coding rooms also allows you to record this area, where it records the actual video conferencing. So if you want to record your live lesson, because you're only using it in coding rooms, so it would mainly be your audio, video, and screen share, you can actually click the record button. It'll download that local file when you're done with your meeting, or when you click stop for the record, it will download that file, and you can have that video recording when you're all done. So it does have extensive video conferencing capabilities for you, managed right inside of your coding environment. And that's one of the most unique things about coding rooms in general. I'd say this is completely unique versus other platforms. Lastly, one of the most important things to point out is something you're not seeing on your screen. Over on my screen, if you look, I can see all the students, and I said that I can see all of you as you're jumping in. There's also a lot of other important features down here that I want to point out. For instance, I can see the last active time of each student over here. So I can see that Enzo opened up this workspace and hasn't typed a single thing the entire time we've been in here. And then you know to follow up with certain students when they haven't worked on anything. For instance, Barry's been there coding away the entire time, and I can see every couple seconds he keeps pinging this and it's going there. But at least I am happy to report that all of my students are actively in coding rooms because we have a little green dot here. If I was to see a gray dot, I would have known that somebody joined the coding room, but then they had left and they're no longer in this workspace. So you can kind of see and manage and make sure your students are actively in here. You can also manage how many times the students have run the code. So recently, we have someone that's run their code, and you can kind of see that here. Sasha, does that update at a certain interval or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it captures a moving window of the last 5 minutes that the student has been in the workspace. So if they leave the workspace, you actually have a window of the last 5 minutes that they were in.
Cool. So for instance, you can see Barry here, after I mentioned that, he started going to town and checking out his code. So you get this really quick snapshot. It's so great while you're live teaching is instead of wasting that little bit of time to kind of walk around the room, not saying I don't enjoy that, I do, but I don't have to do that as often because now I get this quick snapshot of what's going on each student's screen. If I want to check out a student too, I go, I can't believe that this student hasn't been doing something for a while, or wow, Barry's really working on it, or why did Barry just leave? You can see the little gray dot. Barry just left. I can open up the workspace just by clicking this one button on the end here, and it will bring me to Barry's workspace, and I can check out what's going on. If I want to check out and run Barry's code, I can do that also. I can interact with their workspace just like I was the student. If I want to send somebody a message, I want to send Brian a message, see what's going on, I can click on this, and we can use the chat capabilities that are available right inside of coding rooms also. You also have the public chat that you can open up, so you can send messages to everyone. Let's say inside of coding rooms, for instance, you want to share a link like I did with you guys, in Zoom or anything like that. You can use the coding rooms chat publicly there. And I'll let you see what that looks like. And you can see the public chat. So again, all those comfortable video conferencing features built into an extremely powerful IDE that your students can use as part of your live classroom. Now, what I want to point out next is actually leaving the live classroom. When you're done teaching the live classroom, there are a couple different options. In the top right-hand corner, for instance, you'll notice exit as a teacher. If you just select leave or you just close out of the browser tab, your students will still be able to interact with that specific live classroom. So if you want to allow them to still access this as notes, which is typically what I do, so they can log back into the live classroom, check out what they've created, check out the presentation workspace so they can see it as notes. You want to just kind of close out of that browser tab or just leave the classroom. If you click finish, it closes it out and it will kick everybody out of the live classroom. Or they won't be able to restart or get back into that. It won't be accessible any longer if they go and click on the link later on once you click finish. So the link will stay active, the workspace will stay active. If you just simply leave, for instance, if I leave right now, everybody should be able to still be in there and still be able to run, check out everything. But if I was to completely close out of that, I can rejoin. Say hello to everybody still, and we're still good. Same thing, I can close out of the browser tab, or I can navigate back. I can do those things, and the students will still have access to that space. I typically do this, like I said, for notes for the students so they can go see what we coded, what we did together in the lesson while they're working on an independent assignment or doing some homework. If you fully finish the classroom, they'll no longer have access to it. Barry mentioned, for instance, in the chat, he's used the live classroom for assessments. And so if you do that, you may want to completely, well, I guess you maybe don't want to finish the classroom if you want to be able to grade it after, but when you're done, you may not want students to be able to access this at some point. After you've graded the assessments, maybe you're afraid, certain students were absent, you don't want them to copy these other students' code, etc. So after you're all set and you've maybe downloaded each student's workspace for your grading later or something like that, you may want to close out of it if you're watching them live. Any questions before I show off a couple of the smaller nuances to setting up some of the settings in the live classroom? And then I want to get into the really exciting topic of breakout rooms, group work, pair programming type of thing. There's currently not. And Sasha, I don't know if you want to speak about that.
No, I think you did a really thorough job covering.
No, I could see you moving, but there's not a way. So you would have to, let's say, if it was some kind of assessment where you want to check that out after, you would have to go to the students' workspaces, click this little download arrow. Not really too bad of a process. As you see, I can just kind of go along here. I can click on each of these and you can see them downloading right below. So it isn't that daunting of a process, but it's not going to package them into one zip for you or anything like that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're considering. So especially once we're done with the version 2 that you'll show later. So
yes, I see someone raising their hand.
So I just stepped into the shallow end Tuesday when I saw my class, and I had them do an opener. I wasn't in the live classroom. I have one scheduled for tomorrow in class. So I had just made an assignment and I could see their work. I looked at many different squares and I was commenting to them. So right now, I was live, they were live, they were doing work, I saw their work. So it's not really clear how that was different than this.
So this is in real time, you can see all of the students at once. So for you, when you created the actual assignment, you could click and open up each of the individual students' workspaces and maybe new tabs and things like that, right? This allows you all inside of one interface. The students can see what you type. So if you're delivering a lesson live, they can see what you type right in the same screen, as well as you can click on the students' workspaces and see them all here. So this is mainly for, I know we mentioned a couple times using it for an assessment. This is mainly for the live teaching aspect when you're demoing a particular skill and walking through something with the students.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
And from a design perspective, like on our side, we really tuned this more for the synchronous environment, whereas assignments is more for async. So things like the statuses of all the students, being present and the last time that they worked on it and everything, that's more geared towards classroom management in a synchronous sense.
Absolutely. And sometimes
Joe, one way I use it, being able to see all the screens at once for my in-person students, it helps me too when a student might be struggling. I can look at the workspace and see someone that's already passed that concept, and then I can use that to pair up those students. So since I can see everybody at once.
That's an excellent strategy. So this allows you to get a much quicker snapshot. Definitely assignments, you're going to have the advantage of auto grading and different submissions, and there are advantages to using those assignments, and that's how I think of it. I think of the independent work to more be done in the assignments area of coding rooms, and then this is the work we're doing together, which that's one of the topics I'm going to talk about next, is how you can do some pair programming, breakout rooms, group work, stuff like that with this live classroom feature. So if you had a large project with a lot of things, can you upload? I believe you have to upload one file at a time.
Yeah, I can definitely help with that question, Josh. So the best option really is to use the version 2 IDE. So you can try it out now. If you create a workspace, you can select enable V2, and it handles things like data files, images, everything pretty seamlessly. And then we're also supporting other IDEs, like Jupyter Notebooks is already in production, and VS Code. And then those have better utilities for uploading zips and stuff. But you can still do that through coding rooms. But right now it's one at a time. Although you can get your files in one go when you want to download. So I think kind of stay tuned for some of those improvements. But broadly speaking, in that version 2 IDE, all of that is available already.
Yes, definitely stick around for when I look at V2 in just a little bit here. And you'll probably like the improvement. So if some people, are you looking and you like coding rooms is great, but maybe the IDE, the feel of it isn't as familiar, I think version 2 you'll find to be more familiar with some of the tools you've used in the past, probably. All right, so let's say I'm going to leave this live classroom right now, and I'm going to actually open up a new live classroom. So again, in live classrooms, you can just click on new live classroom to set one up. This time I want to show you a couple different things. One being, if we click this Minify conference view by default, I want to show you just what that looks like versus not having it minified. And the enable audio and video, if you turn that off, it just turns off the conferencing completely. The conferencing won't show up at all. And then the third one that I want to point out more of, and because these I think are the three major kind of features, and you may question kind of how they work. The third one's this streamlined code presentation. And so this essentially, the presentation area, it modifies how that behaves for the students. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first turn this off. And I'm going to also turn off the streamlined code presentation. And I'm going to create a new live classroom. And I'm going to send this link into the chat again. So if you want to open this up, check it out. So again, if we were to look at these settings quick, streamlined code presentations turned off, and this Minify the conference view is turned off now. And if I start this up, you'll notice now that I selected that it's not minified, this is mainly if you're really focused on doing the video conferencing. Notice how large, as soon as it opened, the video conferencing area is on the screen. So it takes up a large portion of the screen now. This can still be, shrunk down. So don't think that if you don't enable, that it's minified, that it's going to eat up your whole screen and students can't do that. They can still adjust it. But typically, in my case, I keep it minified, so it's just kind of smaller. It kind of is off to the side like this instead when you first open up the workspace for students. The other thing is, remember, I turned off that streamlined code presentation. Can a couple people go over to the presentation area and start to mess around? So before, you couldn't do that. Now everyone can come over into the presentation area and interact. Now I see some teachers' faces lighting up too, because, well, number one, people are messing around, but number two, I'm sure you can start to see the power of collaborating now with this. Is if you are working in with the class and you want students, you're going to call on students' names and you say, all right, so-and-so, now I would like you to add this. I would like you to add a line where you're going to ask the user, you're going to use the input function to ask the user for their name. Please put that on line 5. So they go over, they go to line 5, and that student types that there. So now you can open up this presentation area for everyone to interact. Now, one of the things where I got excited about this feature, well, at first it scared me a little bit. I was like, can I turn that off so they can't edit that because they're going to mess around with me and troll me? Which, yes, they will do if you don't expect it to be on by accident. But and you see a bunch of names randomly come on all of a sudden when they go and they're trying to copy and paste your code, like the one time I forgot to do it. But what I really thought about is I said, this is awesome for group work or pair programming now, where I can create areas where the students have independent space where they can kind of mess around with some code, but then they have a common goal that they're trying to accomplish on the presentation area. And so this idea of breakout rooms, pair programming, and group work, that's exactly what I would do. So you're saying, how do I do that, Joe? Well, all you need to do, it's pretty simple actually, is you can go over and you can create a live classroom for each of the different groups you'd like to work with. And you can create these ahead of time because you can create live classrooms ahead of time. What I do is I create a document and I just put all the links there that I want to share with students so that when I'm in an actual classroom with them, online or in person, I say, all right, group one is going to be so-and-so and so-and-so. And I give them the link and they then go and open up their live classroom, their workspace where they can collaborate. So for instance, a process that I would do with that, I click on live classroom. I would maybe call it, breakout room 1 or group 1's workspace. So you name them these things, you create it and you set up, and my suggestion is you leave streamlined code presentation off. So that is the end goal. What they're creating together is going to be in that presentation area. Each student does have their own workspace where if they say, for instance, and I've heard really good conversation around this, one student will say, hey, I'm going to try out something. They go in their workspace, they try out something, and they bring it over to the code presentation where the actual group is working on their final product or whatever they're working on. So it's an excellent tool for collaboration. So again, you just create that breakout room 1, and it's the same process. You can set up a template, etc. You can set these all up ahead of time, because if I can go over into now, if I go to my live classrooms, for instance, you'll see that so this is just my normal dashboard view now on Coding Rooms. You can see each of the ones that I've created so far with you guys on this call, they're all showing up here. As long as the start time is now or in the future, they will show up on this dashboard. If you need to get back to a previous classroom, sometimes, for instance, I label mine based on a specific concept or idea. So earlier I shared a slide just because it was already up on my computer, and it was about one-dimensional arrays. And so I will have a live classroom about one-dimensional arrays. So my students will go over and they can come over here and they can actually see the previous classes if they're in their specific course, or I can go over to a specific class. I can click on it and I can start up that specific classroom, or a student can, for us to continue with that topic. So you don't have to recreate a classroom every day. You can continue from that topic. So if you're in the middle of something, the bell rings, you go, all right, tomorrow, guys, we're going to work on this still. They can still use the same classroom link as long as you leave that open for them. Even if I guess you close it, you could start it up again at that point for that instance specifically. But if you want the students to access it still in the meantime, maybe to complete homework that night, you want to leave it open. So all your breakout rooms that you set up, your group assignments, will be there for students to work on. And of course, as I can right now, if I go back to the second one we were messing around with the streamlined presentation, I actually think I'd have it open another tab, which is okay too. I can come here. I can check out, all right, what's their progress like? All right, looks like everyone's been fooling around again over in the presentation area. But you can do that. If you want to see if any students did anything independently, of course, you still have the student workspace area where you can go through and look at the individual students if they worked on anything at all. But it's excellent for group work and being able to check out that in the collaboration aspect where all the students are kind of working in this one area. Any questions about any of that? I will say, I guess I'll say this one thing before I open it up for more questions, actually. One of the things that a student asked me when they were kind of working together after we've been using coding rooms is they wondered if they could create a live classroom. They said, hey, we're on a Zoom call tonight. We were saying it would be great if we could just use coding rooms while we're working together talking about something. Is that possible? It is possible for them. So even when students log into coding rooms independently, they can open up a live classroom and they can work back and forth and do some independent study or group study, to practice concepts and go over things together. Sasha, I believe though the free student account does have some limits on time.
I believe the time one has been lifted for now, but
Okay.
It is limited to 5 students. The time should be limited, or might only be limited if they're using video conferencing. It's not something that's come up a lot lately. I'll say that.
Okay, my students never said anything about that. I did say to them, there might be a limit or something like that, but they never said there was. So I was curious about that. There is, if you create a classroom, there's going to be limitations to the number of admins you have and learners you have, and you can check out your limits right on the page where you created it. You can also check out a quick glance of what you have kind of enabled on that other screen. And as long as you haven't started up the live session, you can actually edit that and go back and you can say, oops, I messed up and I actually want the conference to be minified and I want it to be smaller. I can go back and edit that if you didn't open it up already. You can also add other admins with this URL down below here. So for instance, if you have maybe a star student that's going to be like a TA with you or something like that, they can join as an admin or a co-teacher, co-presenter on the workspace and have the admin capabilities of access to the presentation area and stuff like that. Possibly how you'd like to use this also is maybe, I haven't done this yet, but I did brainstorm it. Students do some kind of group projects, and then there's a presentation aspect to it. What you could do is when you set up the live classrooms for your students for their group project, you invite each of the students as actual admins on it, so that later on when the students are doing a presentation, they can actually share the normal learner link, or you can share the normal learner link for that group. And you can have the presentation streamlined still, so other students can jump in, see the workspace, see the students as they run it, without actually messing around with their code and stuff like that. So you can have students that be like the teacher in the presentation. All right, so before I give you a little demo of version 2 IDE, which I'm extremely excited about. It is incredible. My students have been using it in the assignments in the workspaces area, and they absolutely love it. So if you're using coding rooms, and I think you'll be very excited about it. If you're just starting to use coding rooms, you'll say, yeah, I like that, I think. But is there any questions? So no, so let me review that. Minify conference. Let me go back to these settings quick. Give a bit of a zoom in here. Minify conference view, what that does is the video conferencing aspect, it makes it smaller when the students first open the workspace. So it doesn't make it seem like a video conference. Instead, it makes it seem like a workspace that happens to have a small area for a video conference. If you have this turned, so that's if it's turned on, it makes it smaller, makes it a little smaller. If you have it turned off, it makes it kind of larger and it takes up majority of the screen. The streamlined code presentation, this one's the most important, I feel, that you want to make sure you have on or off, depending on what you want to do, before you actually start the live classroom. This enables the students to be able to edit or not. So when it's off, when streamlined code presentation is off, everybody can edit the presentation area. When you turn this feature on, only the admins, co-presenters, whatever you'd like to call them, the teachers can edit it. You're very welcome. And please feel free to unmute if you'd like, but if you're comfortable using the chat, that's also okay. But let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah,
You just might
go ahead.
You just might hear my kids in the background. That's why
I'm fine with that. My son went to bed, thank God, because he's almost 1. He likes to scream. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, then another question afterwards.
It's not-
And I want to say I love using it. That the kids have loved using it. I don't think the group work is quite there where I want it to be to use. I would like to see something like, if you're doing a live classroom, would be presentation MySpace, and group space or group space, so that I can see it all in the same room. I don't have to leave classrooms. I don't have to set them up manually. I don't have to worry about kids going into the wrong classrooms or the wrong classrooms and things like that. In addition to that, I would love to have group assignments, so I can assign people to the groups as well. Again, I'll be using this. I love it and it's great. I don't think the breakout rooms is quite there yet for it would be conducive for me. The question I have is, I wanted to know about the VS Code integration. Is that something we can go over, or is that something?
I love that also. Maybe John, if you can hang around for a little bit when we're done.
Okay.
I think Sasha and I can show you that. Brian too is smiling. He's a VS Code user.
Thank you.
Oh, I had another question also. Is there a way for teachers to share assignments? Like I've created a number of assignments with JUnit test plans and such, and I'd love to share them with other people, but also if anybody else has created some, I'd love to, use theirs. Is there a way for that to happen?
So as of right now, I believe, and so the Coding Rooms team can comment more on this. I believe they have to manually do it, but they are incredibly nice people that I believe will do that for you if you really need to.
Yeah, Joe's pretty much spot on. We've been fielding those requests manually for a while, and we're working to kind of build more of a marketplace where it's integrated with the platform, and then you could even charge for the courses that you build. So like if you want to charge $20 for a small block of assignments, kind of like the pay teachers, but for comp sci assignments. That's what's currently in our roadmap. That's not as concrete, such that I could give you a release date. But we're working on that alongside the group projects. I'd say that those are, once this second version of the ID is sort of fully ironed out and released, that's the next thing that we're working on.
All right, any other questions before we check out version 2 of the IDE? All right, so the first place I'd like to show that is where you can start using the version 2 IDE right now. And so where you can start using the version 2 IDE right now, if you log into Coding Rooms, is if you go to Workspaces. If you go to the Workspaces area, you can access your workspaces, your students' assignments if you've opened them and edited them, as well as any individual coding workspace you'd like to just work on. You can just click on the New Workspace button and create a workspace. This is just an area for you to, again, do some kind of independent project on your own, test out something in Coding Rooms just to make sure it works, etc. And so if I go over and give it a title, you can enable this version 2 beta right here. In the version 2 beta, then you can actually check out what V2 looks like in the IDE. Select your language. We'll switch it up. We'll do Java this time. Click Create Workspace. And here is the version 2 IDE. I think for a number of you, you'll look at this design and you'll find it a little bit more familiar with some of the IDEs maybe you've used before. We have our file tree over here on the left. We can create new files. And we have tabs for our files as we open them, or we can close them out there. We can check it out. You can make this file tree area larger. You can create folders. You can upload files, download files. So you can do a number of those different things. It even allows you to do default configurations for the run button. So you can set the default file to be a different file if you'd like. What's great about this also is, let's say you create certain files, certain runner files, as someone was saying, that actually tests out a class. Then you can set that to be the default for your students over in assignments once it's enabled over there, as well as you can set up a custom command, maybe for using a particular library or a jar, something like that. So you can configure all of those things here. All the other great features are still available also. We got playback. I didn't do anything, so nothing to see. And you still have the drop down where you can select any of the files that are in the workspace in order to run them. You will notice, though, a much more simplified area down below, where we just have a console and we have our shell. So we can kind of just run this code, see the output. This also doesn't get garbaged up with a lot of stuff. Instead, it does a unique run each time. You have your shell where you can do any other Linux commands and all kinds of other stuff if you want, just to mess around with different things, whatever you want to do. You can do that over here and see what's going on. So you can interact with the system that way. Again, you can also, if you're doing stuff with GUIs and graphics, you can see the desktop. Click on this View Desktop. Instead of it having to open up in a new tab, you can also preview the desktop right here in a small window. So your students can check out their GUI application here, interact with it, as well as they can open it in a new tab if they'd like it to be more full screen and have a fully immersive experience with playing around with their game or whatever they design. So the V2 is really slick, I think. So what's great about this is coming soon. If I go over and create an assignment quick, I can show you that this works in assignments, and it works as you would expect, but I'll give it a quick show off. I would assume, and Sasha, you can correct me if you're wrong, if someone's really excited about V2 and they're willing to test it in this beta phase, I'm sure for assignments, I'm sure Sasha would be willing to talk to you more about that and work with you on enabling it for assignments. Yeah,
we're enabling those pretty much for anyone that wants them, and it will be available for all your new anytime a student opens an assignment for the first time, once that's been enabled, it will start with V2 from there on out.
So, and that's what mine set up that way. So I'm not going to enable, I'm not going to, explain assignments fully, but essentially you can set up a template. And if you go over the template area, you'll notice we have V2 now running as a template over for the assignment for you to configure everything. You can configure the run button to run a certain way if you included a library or something like that. If we go and we check out the student view of it and I open this up, you'll see that the students also are presented with the version 2 ID in the assignments area. Their instructions will be over here, whatever you provide as a prompt, and then they have the version 2 ID to use. And I have had glowing reviews from my students about version 2 ID. They really enjoy it also. Lastly, and this one's the most exciting, and this is the probably getting beta testers soon, is the live classroom version of V2. So let me start up this V2 demo of the live classroom. And so you can see that this is the live classroom here. This is the presentation workspace. I can click on my workspace and see them side by side. I can click on student workspaces and they would all populate over here. In the same way, they would look like the version 2 ID. So they would look just like these windows. The version 2 ID would be in those areas, just like how that version 1 of the ID that we saw is in those same populated areas. What I actually really like about this is that you can, even if you have conferencing enabled, we can kind of just close out of that conferencing area. So if you have conferencing enabled, in version 1, you wouldn't be able to hide it completely. If you were just like, I don't care about conferencing right now, I don't care about that, you couldn't hide it completely. This one, I can hide it. I'll get my students list over here still. It would look just like the, the instructor over here. The students would be populated. Chat tab, so you can chat with everyone. It's very, very beautiful. Desktop can be viewed very easily also. As well as, so for every student, you can view their desktop too if they're working on a GUI in the live classroom in such an easy way. I never imagined it would be this easy for me in the classroom to see all this stuff. It's really, really powerful. Any questions about this before I stop my screen share?
Can we see VS Code?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there might be a couple folks interested.
You're right. I think there probably are. So let's check that out. So if we go over to exit this, I probably have a nice demo somewhere in here. Sasha, you guys don't have VS Code running as an option, a workspace option, right? It's still the same way?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Everything's the same stuff.
So what you can do is if you open up the desktop, this URL is essentially the same as to access VS Code. I can just type in VSC instead of what was there before. What was it? DTP desktop?
Yeah, the DTP.
And I have VS Code running right here. And if I kind of snap these around, you'll notice I have the same files. Everything's good going on. Let me open the desktop. I actually have graphics on this one too, so it's really cool. So I have VS Code right here. I can run my Java file over here. So this is Visual Studio Code right in the web browser, working on a computer, all in the web browser here. Everything was still loading up over there, so that's why it took a sec. Boom. So you can see it loaded right up on the instance of the Linux computer that we have, and I ran that from VS Code. And of course, I could just look at VS Code and we could do something, else here. And I can run this, and we should get the same results. I can run it just right here inside of Visual Studio Code. It's beautiful. You absolutely can. All the features of Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, you can also get extensions. Most extensions are working. You can fully utilize the debugger.
Yep. All
the history syncs back. It's not quite the same keystroke by keystroke that you would get in the coding rooms ID. I think it's more like about a second or two interval. So you'll see some chunks, but it's usually quite the difference between just blank sort of copy pasting and actual student incremental labor is quite clear. And then, so you'll see that everything syncs across. That also means as the teacher, even if your student is running on VS Code, you can actually just use V2 and you will still see the same code that the student sees. So that means even if you don't want to use the same ID as your students, or your students have different preferences, they can just pretty much use whatever they want. And
then, if you type in VS Code, will it show? If you type in the IDE, I'm sorry, in coding rooms, will it show up in VS Code?
It will update the file, and then VS Code will throw. Well, I think we'll either auto update it or we'll throw some kind of a message saying to get the latest, you need to update the file. So we can actually try that here. Oh, yeah.
It just did. Yeah, I did some testing with that. It works pretty well. If I move around, let's go to the file system. I can move around some things too, let's say, and it should update.